But we wanted to start off with actually a really inspiring quote just from the other week from one of the participants at the Persuasion 2024 event that we hosted, Aaron Blasey, who leads Publicis as creative. Thanks, Constanza. And he made the point that a lot of optimization has been about micro changes, little A/B testing of backgrounds and tweaks, placement of logos, but the really big ideas are what have the power to break through and make the kind of impact on consumer opinions, sentiment, demand that brands need and all kinds of campaigns need when they're going to actually win. And so he says here, we're using new tech to test ideas quicker, visualize concepts, and sell through ideas. And so really this webinar here is in a sense rising to that challenge. Like, how are folks like that doing this? What have we seen work now that we've worked with quite a significant number of big brands around the world, not just in the United States, to do this, and how can you do it too? So we've basically distilled down quite a lot of material. So we'll try not to rush, but give a little bit of a kind of a taste, I think, of each of the main planks, I think, of how to implement these kinds of agile testing programs. The big industry shifts that we're seeing happening that really motivate what Aaron's talking about there are these on the screen right now. The first is that people are beginning now at scale to use data to optimize not just micro in-channel optimization, a specific execution for a particular social channel or a particular distribution channel, but big idea creative. In other words, the stuff upstream of that determines what these multi-channel campaigns are all about. So that's number one. Number two, to do that, they're using the right metrics now, instead of ones that were sort of just the more convenient ones, the ones that we already had, perhaps the ones that those channels already gave us that were in front of us. And in order to do that, number three, folks are using new tech, and in particular, they're using new tech to do it very rapidly and iteratively. And as a result of that, we're seeing these things at the bottom of the slide, which is that people are unlocking agile marketing practices that were previously completely impossible because you just couldn't be agile if you had to wait 2 months for something. You can't do iterations when you're not able to get results quickly. And as a result of that, they're getting really big returns. So we're here to give a bit of an intro into how all of that stuff's happening. The first reason this is happening, and the first kind of clue, is that creative is the number one lever for success. So we're not the first to say this. This is a slide from Nielsen, but all of the work over the last decade or so that focused on in-channel optimization, targeting, branding, reach, important work. But as you can see, it kind of leaves out just under half of the impact, according to Nielsen, of what levers actually let you succeed at running campaigns. So the whole point of this kind of investment of time and energy is because creative is the central reason campaigns are successful. You can get all the stuff on the left-hand side right, but if you haven't got the creative right, it doesn't matter. Whereas you've got the creative right, you've got a lot of ways you can get it to people. So the first point is that creative is the number one lever for campaign success. But to optimize it, you have to be optimizing the right thing. A lot of the traditional, last decade or so optimization focused on the bottom of the funnel, getting clicks and sales, transaction data right. Now, of course, ultimately, we want consumers at the bottom of the funnel. But as any marketing organization knows, it does a lot of investment and big idea thinking at the top of the funnel or the middle of the funnel, consideration, for example. You can't simply rely on measuring that final click if what you're trying to do is something to precursor to getting the click. You have to create the demand in the first place in order to harvest it. And the problem, of course, that we face out there is that with all the data that's provided to us by the platforms that distribute content, that information is not there. What actually changes your mind, what makes you want to consider a product more as a consumer, simply isn't reported automatically by ad platforms. And so, just to pause for a minute on why we're doing this work, Swayable was really born out of that exact problem. I was at the New York Times, and we were doing a lot of advertising like that, bottom of the funnel, click-through rate optimization, whether an orange rectangle or a red rectangle was better. We had walls of different variants of these to try to get the sort of 1 or 2% additional click rate up until, we had the first ever CMO of the company, David Rubin, and he and Droga 5, fantastic creatives and marketers, realize that you've got to tell those big stories, the upper funnel story about why the brand's important and valuable if you're going to get that click through eventually, that subscription at the bottom of the funnel. So that's not news to marketers. The whole industry exists because this is true. The problem is it was very difficult to measure this stuff. And so, our contribution to this kind of agile marketing is really to try to make it as easy to get a measurement of success at the middle or upper funnel by defining the right metrics as it is for, excuse me, for the kind of micro optimization that's been traditionally the focus of a lot of in-channel optimization. So this is not a pitch for Swayable. That's the last thing we'll say directly about the platform. But I think the last thing to say before we get into the how is, really the business case, the size of the prize here. And I think it's one thing to say, look, optimization's good and important. It's another thing to look at the size of the levers involved. But, when the opportunity is very big, it becomes like a very high priority, and it's worth trying to think about how to implement and transform new, practices rather than, something that sort of is just on the to-do list lower down. Everyone's very familiar with, this quote on the left, which is apocryphally, I think, sort of said to have been said by Wanamaker, half my advertising is wasted. Obviously, if you can know which half, you've got a 2x lever to improve the impact of campaigns. And the distributions we're showing here on the right, which show how often you get a very high impact ad, an ad that causes 5 or 10 percentage points of lift in demand for the product or consideration to purchase. The point is that if you don't know which is which, on average, the score that the creative is getting is much closer to 0. It's above 0, but not by much. 1 or 2 percentage points is sort of roughly the average that we've seen across all ads tested. A lot of stuff does worse than that. Some stuff does better. So by knowing which half will work, you've got a 2x lever, right, at least. But that's the easier way to do this. And the big motivation, the size of the prize here, I think, for doing something more than just the easy thing is to recognize that just testing ads at the end of a creative production process is sort of obvious. It's important to do, but there's much bigger gains that brands are starting to get when they realize that you can build in evidence to earlier stage decisions in campaigns. And that includes what concepts to make in the first place before they even become an ad. Are we picking the right brief? Are we coming up with the right idea for the ad across all channels? And even earlier than that, the very messages themselves that explain how we want to show up in the marketplace, are those right? And so rather than that just be theoretical, luckily, since we've done a really enormous amount of testing now globally, we can show real results. I won't say exactly which of our brand customers this is for, but this particular large retail brand is testing hundreds of assets monthly, and you can see a real 2x gain there from simply implementing the action standard that the creative lift has to be above a certain level. A second campaign here, and this is the final point on the business case, you can see a real example of a more than 10x increase in the impact of their work. That is not just an action standard now, but that is actually implementing agile processes. So the difference being that there's these iterative loops. You don't just have a production line of creative that finishes with the ad that's then tested and gets a green light or doesn't get a green light. Instead, you've got a process that feeds back the insights from each round of testing into the team that's coming up with the ideas and building the creative, so that those insights actually form part of what gets briefed into the next round of creative. So seeing those results as we first started to see them was just completely mind-blowing, because it's just very difficult to even conceive of a lever that's that large for improving the impact of marketing. So I guess before we throw it to the case study, to really show how at least one of our large CPG brands does that, we want to kind of give this little framework here for, if you like, the 3 stages of maturity. The first one, as I said, is just sort of testing stuff you're already making. Easy to do, no process changes needed, other than occasionally not spending a lot of media if you notice something's not going to work, or putting more rotations behind, greater frequency behind the stories that are working. The second stage is doing that, but then realizing, hey, there were some decisions earlier on in the creative process that we can also inform with evidence. And we'll show in just a moment how you can actually do that using prototype creative as treatments to make decisions before an ad gets made, that let you work out whether it's the right ad to make. But really that third horizon, the sort of 10x scores come from when people do those two things, but do them systematically. So it's not anymore just a research project, a thing to check that maybe the insights team will, help the marketers do, but it's actually the job of the marketers at that point. It's a process that is iterative and continuous. And that's what we call agile marketing here. Yeah, one of the questions that's probably worth hitting at this point is, can you remind me what the agile part of agile marketing means? Basically, it means this idea of rapidly iterating on concepts using evidence that proves whether or not those concepts are the best available ones that you have, as opposed to really going through a longer, potentially multi-month process before you really get any data about if you're able to cause lift with creative. It's basically an adaptation of what the engineering world, software engineering, came up with, where they realized, that they used to make software in big chunks of, 2-year releases, and they realized, hey, if we could do quicker and shorter releases, we can learn from users whether or not what we're making works, and then we can make it better. So A/B testing is certainly part of it, but A/B testing traditionally means that bottom of the funnel micro optimization. You're typically A/B testing in a channel, and you're typically looking for engagement, like views or likes or click-throughs. For upper funnel metrics, usually, although it's okay to use the term A/B testing for it, it's usually a form of testing that's a little bit more sophisticated. It requires measuring the demand or the consideration, which is a survey experiment, rather than counting the number of clicks that you get on a particular ad. So all of that's pretty theoretical, and I wanted to make sure to move it straight away into the practical and give you a real example from one of our favorite accounts, Groupo Bimbo, who are out of Mexico, actually, a big multinational brand based out of Mexico City. And these folks, I think, ship an enormous fraction of the United States baked goods. If you've ever eaten anything from Sara Lee, or you've had a Thomas's English muffin, or I don't know, probably you can remember Taylar. They've got at least another half dozen brands. This is how they do their agile marketing, and they worked really closely with Bain & Company as part of a big marketing transformation process. We work a lot with agencies and consultancies that are deploying this, but part of our message here is like, that's great, and you should bring in experts to help with it, and you can really get started yourself. I think the concepts are pretty clear. So what they're doing is basically 2-week sprints. And a sprint, again, is an adaptation of like software engineering concept, quite deliberately. That's where these terms like agile come from, of course. At the beginning of the sprint, they're figuring out, what do we need to learn? We're going to make a campaign. We need to win Gen Z consumers, and we need to win them at a higher rate. And we think that the way to do that is to change our tone in, our voice, our brand voice in the ads, for example. Or it could be, we should be highlighting a different value prop. This should be about health. It shouldn't be about taste, or it should be about coolness, not about, other brand equities. Those are examples of hypotheses that you need to test because they're so central to whether the campaign will work. Step 2, of course, is run the test. And that's, what we're here to support. And of course, as part of that, identify the implications. And then step 3 is act on them. So basically, you don't just sort of file away those insights in the drawer or write up a report. You figure out what that means for the next round of creative that's going to be created, or the improvements to the creative briefs, or, pivots to the entire, campaign, premises. And in most cases, those are not major pivots, but it's about refining in on the right concepts that are going to win consumers over. So let's make that real for folks. In the case of Thomas's, they were really worried about Gen Z. Most of their consumers were older cohorts, were older, consumers. And of course, some of those were starting to age out of the consumer marketplace. So a lot of the background ethnographic research and focus grouping that they did suggested that, the brand had a bit of a dated way of speaking, and that updating that might be a sensible sounding approach to winning Gen Z consumers. And there was some edgier kind of toned messages that were developed. Then there was sort of some debate over that, and a sort of compromise that was called optimistic was also, on the table. What they did, though, unlike what you would do in a non-agile marketing campaign, which is basically resolve this debate internally, often the highest paid person in the room, their instincts will prevail. The idea here, the thing that's different with the agile marketing is you use evidence, and the evidence actually proves that you're able to get lift from that consumer cohort in a controlled environment, rather than sort of suggestive evidence that is less than that. In this case, the way that they got that proof, and we'll double click a little bit more together on how to do this, what we call prototype creative, was they made deliberately created ads that were not actually ads they'd ever intended to run, but they're this idea of prototype creative. In other words, treatments that are designed for the testing itself, where they look to a consumer like the kind of ad you might see in a regular channel. You're not being sort of asked to be an editorial critic of a storyboard or to imagine an ad. You're being shown something that to you as a consumer looks like an ad. But the reason it's been created is to test just that one variable, the choice of tone. And in this case, you can see this relatively generic picture of breakfast with Thomas's English muffins. They come up with much cooler stuff when they want to run real ads. But the thing that they're making it for is so that they can swap out that message at the top. The one on the left had their traditional tone, 140 years of baking, sort of sensible way of speaking. The one on the right had the edgy tone. You can see the emojis. Everything else is the same. And the one in the middle was a compromise. So we've sort of had the spoiler already on the slide here. You can see that contrary to their expectations, they got twice the lift from their traditional tone messages here as they did from some of these other messages. 50% more than edgy and about double more than the optimistic tone. Now, we're simplifying here a little bit. Of course, they didn't just run 3 things. There was a whole set of things that helped them to figure this out. But this is basically representative of how you'd use this evidence early in the process rather than at the end. And what they're gaining here is not more clicks or more views on a particular Instagram ad. Instead, they're learning if the actual intended tone across their multi-channel campaign, this ended up on billboards, TV ads, not just Instagram, whether that's the right choice for the omni-channel campaign. So in that's a nice example of why it's a lot more than an A/B test to sort of maximize the perhaps background color choice or something similar. So these guys are doing a fantastic job. They're now rolling it out globally and across all of their brands. Mike here, who's done some great talks with us on the stage, makes the point of saying that all of this now happens within days and weeks. Again, this sort of inherent in the agile marketing concept rather than the months that it used to take to really, even take these decisions before. And because they're working with Bain & Company, folks often say, well, how do you know that this data, does what you think it does? And of course, one way you can do that is by actually doing a quite expensive in-channel holdout test. And so Bain did some fantastic work here, fully independently from us, where they actually created holdout groups, markets that were not shown the optimized creative, and the actual transaction data, the sales data was compared to markets that did see the optimized creative, and they were able to measure, for a mature brand, been around for 140 years, it's not every day that you get 7% lift in the actual, bottom of the funnel transaction based on an upper funnel optimization. In fact, it's rare that folks doing upper funnel, campaigns really, are able to get any real read on the attribution directly. So this work was really exciting to see. So you can see here just sort of a map of how they're thinking about each stage of the decision-making in their marketing campaigns. And in fact, we go and do some work with MIT where we, speak to the next generation of marketers and talk about, this slightly more academic slide, but it shows you how a marketing campaign, as folks would know, has some kind of logic to it, where at the top is a brand purpose, something that you don't change every, year. Maybe it was said 140 years ago. And at the very bottom is a bunch of concepts, and those are executions on particular channels and screens. But they have some coherence to them because they're part of a particular, campaign. And so the idea is in the middle, how can we get more evidence at those points when we're taking the really bigger driver, big idea decisions, so that when we get to the creative executions at the bottom, we're making the right stuff. And it's choices that are not just kind of, red, green backgrounds, orange, yellow, background stuff. It's really, is it edgy or is it traditional? Is it snackable or is it healthy? What's this campaign about? So we'll get into the playbook in more detail here, because I think that's sort of designed to kind of paint the picture in your head of how brands are doing that. The obvious question is, okay, can you lay out more systematically exactly what that looks like? What's the playbook? And so, here it is, basically. There's really 2 main things that the teams are doing here. The first is they're thinking really logically about the hypotheses that they need to test. So they're breaking down campaign ideas into a set of key choices. We've just looked at one or two there: tone of voice, value prop that's expressed for the product, but messaging, concept. Is it a family eating snackable muffins? Is it a kid at school? These are the concepts. Messengers. Who is it? Is it a kid? Is it a mom? Is it a brother? Is it somebody else? Are they? Where are they in the country, in the world? What are they wearing? All of these things are relevant choices. Brand equities that you focus on, specific details of the script, all of that stuff. Basically, step one there is figure out what stuff feels the most uncertain or the most important, and then what you would ideally have evidence about whether it is the right choice. You can't test everything. So there's a lot of judgment at that stage to say, well, look, this is a big decision and this is maybe a smaller decision. So we'll talk about structuring hypotheses in a moment. The key thing is, having structured the hypothesis, that is identified the key assumptions or choices going into the campaign and the brief and the creative. You then need to find a clever way to show that to consumers, stimulus, creative prototypes, so that you can then run a test to see if that's right. And we've got a picture in our head of that now because we just saw Thomas's do that. That those Instagram-looking ads were not real ads; they were prototype creative, designed to test that message. And so part of sort of what we want to do on the back end of the webinar here is just leave people with a really clear impression that this is really easy and you can do it. It feels like a kind of complicated thing that would take a year of transformation exercise. It is actually something you can really just get started on straight away, and anybody on your team is in a good position to do the work here on the right-hand side that creates the stimulus that you can then get that evidence for those choices on the left. The bottom there is really something that becomes more important as you go from kind of the early experimenting with this through to actually scaling it up, which is really establishing process and roles. We won't talk too much about that, but we'll just give a little kind of taste of the kinds of decisions and ways that bigger, deployments of this kind of agile marketing are approaching it. So with structuring the hypothesis, we'll actually start on the right-hand side because I feel like it's easier to sort of see it and then see what makes sense on the left-hand side. So folks are often asking, okay, I kind of get the concept, prototype creative. What do you really mean? And how can we do this, right? So best way to show it is just give actual examples. We've sanitized, some of the creative here in cases where, we need to do that. In this case, this is a large online fintech company that has done a lot of testing with Swayable. And it's an illustration of the simplest form of prototyping. It's a form of prototyping that somebody with zero design skills can do. In fact, the prototyping here, which were tests that were done for the launch of a really big national campaign for accounting and tax prep bundled software, was done by an in-house marketing team, folks that are not creatives, using PowerPoint. All they did was take the copy that they were experimenting with that carried with it the value props that they were trying to determine were the right ones for the launch. In this case, you can see two of them clearly on the screen. One of them, you can see the bundle that saves time and money. Obviously, that idea is about saving time and money, right? That's a different kind of campaign or value prop to focus on than don't make mistakes, don't miss important details, right? They had 5, 6 of these and particular target segments. But the point was, all I had to write was 5 lines of text, really 2 sentences. Put the logo in the corner. That alone was a stimulus that then was enabling them to demonstrate that showing that to certain consumers gave far higher lift in some cases with particular segments than others. So, the consumer is just looking at text that they might see from a regular brand. From their perspective, it's very natural to look at this, even though it's so easy to make. So that's simple text with a logo. These are examples of tests that we did for Apple streaming service, Apple Music. You can see these are, again, not ads that actually Apple has ever run anywhere. But it's copy that they've already got. You can find this copy straight on their website. So there's sort of no additional work was done to figure out the text. The problem is there's 7 or whatever it is, different things that they could focus on for their campaign. And the question is, which of those things are going to deliver us the most lift in intent to subscribe to Apple Music? We circled the one actually that ended up winning here. Funnily enough, that's not the one that they focused on because there was other considerations. In this case, obviously promoting a rival operating system wasn't what they wanted to do. So they went with the second best one, and you'll see that in a lot of their campaigning. You'll also see in the corner that we actually also had them, they mocked up in exactly the same kind of format, an opposition spot. And in this case, the tests were done showing consumers both spots for their service as well as for a competing service at the same time. And the net lift in subscription intent for their service was what was measured. So, again, that correct upper funnel metric, intent to subscribe, not like I looked for 5 extra seconds or my eye, went to the right place or I clicked on it. You can click on things that aren't going to lead you to subscribe to a new music service. The real question is, intent to subscribe. So simple text with the logo, going up one level of, fidelity, which is what the, design thinkers would call this, up from simpler prototypes to more fidelity prototypes, ones that capture more of the broad idea. You can see static text with an image that represents a concept. So in this case, it's not just words, but the idea is this campaign's going to show some stuff, and that might be particularly important to see if the concept lands and generates the lift. So in this case, these prototype creatives were created in under an hour. I know that because I did it with the client myself. The idea was just to test in this case. You'll see later as we get to structuring the hypotheses, whether natural, brand equities versus self-esteem as a brand equity, whether more, was the winning choice for this particular consumer segment. So, there was a set of rapid prototyping images put together just to represent the natural and the self-esteem choices there. Those are actually done on DALL-E. So, very quick to do, spin up a few of them, pick the ones that look right, tweak the prompts. I'm not a creative and I was able to do that for these demonstration purposes. So, the time to create that is as little as an hour. You might want to mess around with it a little bit more, have a meeting. You could take a couple of hours, but the point is, it's not a whole process that needs weeks. It may or may not need your agency. Agencies are great folks to do it, but there's nothing getting in the way of getting started. So static text with images. And then the last one here, which actually, because it feels like it's possibly the hardest, Taylar, who is brilliant at many things, but I think it's fair to say you weren't trained as a creative, right? Was able to make these herself. And I did a round also with another person from the CS team. So we'll give you a peek here at how you can even make something which is video with text and multiple images. And this is probably the best format for prototype creative. So Taylar, do you want to steal the show for a second and show just a little peek of making prototype?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
I will quickly grab screen share from you. Okay, great. Can everyone see that? I think so. Yeah. Okay, so in doing this, a big kind of question is how quickly can I get something out that is, reasonably looks good and respondents can interact with and engage with. So for this particular example, these are all photos quickly grabbed from Adobe. And in order to do something like this, I am not an artist, so it's very quick and easy. But in order to do something like that, you just quickly kind of grab those photos. They were free.
You're in a tool called Canva.
Yes, I'm in Canva right now. Great question. So you grab those into Canva. You can just upload the photos that you downloaded to Canva. And it's really simple. You basically just take them and you can just sort of pop the photo in here. And what you'll do is just quickly set it as the background image. You can add an additional one. And if you're trying to test different messengers, that sort of thing, this is also helpful. So I'm going to grab this one, put this one in again, set it as the background. I want to add a little bit of text if you also have copy. So I'm going to add a text box quickly. And I have my text just copied. So I'm going to take that and just paste it in here. Really simple. And then I'm going to just sort of make it bigger. So it's, really easy to see for folks. I'm going to just kind of update the color a little bit because it's easier to see on this colored background here. And then I'll probably go ahead and just add some quick effects, maybe add a background, move it around a little bit, maybe animate it so it's just comes in a little bit more interesting for folks. And then, really at the end of that, maybe just do a quick logo on it. So, folks know what it is. And then really, that's pretty much it. And then, you have a video here that you can go through and play. And it takes all of 2 or 3 minutes to do. And you can update the, whatever photos you want, update the copy, etc. And this is something that we can really easily implement, and your CSM can also help you do really easily implement and test for folks as well. So any questions about that, feel free to drop them in the chat. And then I'll pass it back to you, and I'll make sure we get to all the questions at the end.
I love that. Yeah. I mean, we often get this question sort of like, hey, you keep saying make more prototype creative, how do I do that? And I think, part of the goal here is to say, like, really, you can do it. It may take a moment to learn a couple of tools, but it's absolutely doable by really anyone on the team, whether they're, professional creatives or not. The idea is once you've got some idea of the concept, a mood board, a set of images, you can make prototype creative that lets you test if it's the right direction to go with the campaign. And this is just a set of tools that Taylar and the team use and encourage other folks to use. So you might want to write down a few of them. We just looked at Canva and we mentioned DALL-E, but there's also Midjourney and some of the more sophisticated stuff for video editing at the bottom. So there's a burgeoning set of tools available to make this stuff really easy. The point is that now that's enabling really rapid creation of consumer-friendly versions of concepts, and then coupled with the ability to test that in 24 hours, which is, of course, Swayable's business. That just unlocks this ability to iterate in, with a speed and therefore kind of with a gain in impact that was kind of really not even, imaginable before. So that's really what's been picked up here. So we promised the second half of this, the first half of this was how do you structure the hypotheses? We see now how you test them. So knowing how to do the tests, what does it mean to kind of pick the hypotheses out and then, choose the right things to make those kinds of prototypes for? And of course, look, we're sort of compressing, a few different modules of kind of webinar here, but to give you a peek at it, basically the idea is to be really clear about what the assumptions are going into the campaigns. This is an example from a large tech firm that we work with, we're really one of the largest companies around, and they've got 4 message themes that they were exploring for a particular one of their product suite that they were looking to promote. And so the idea behind the structuring of the hypotheses is to say, look, let's write a few versions of that kind of prototype creative. In other words, just messages. This was very much like the first example was just text with a logo. And then let's see what lift we get in demand for our products and for love for our brand, since that's what the campaign's for. And you can see in this case, we've circled the ones that had the better scores, the top scores, and put a little trophy cup next to the message theme that clearly was the winner. What's critical about this is now when they go into the creative development, they know that that first and fourth message theme are not doing as much work for them. The third one is very important if they want to get lift, and it looks like they get an occasional win with the second one. So that's about the most important evidence you could have to go into that next stage of like, okay, what should these ads be? Here's an example. We peeked out a little bit how the prototyping of the creative was made, and you can see now the testing of it. In this case, the reason for making those specific prototypes was to test the idea about whether these campaigns should be focused on, natural and sustainable, brand equities for their products, or if it should lean harder into this theme of self-esteem, which was, equally one of the things that the brand speaks about. So for this particular segment, and for this particular moment in history, there was a really clear answer. The nature themed prototype creative tested well above the self-esteem prototype creative. And then when you flow that down into making finished ads, that's about the most predictable, most predictive evidence you can have that ads with that theme are going to work better than ads that have the other choice. So that's kind of the key idea behind structuring the hypotheses. So final thing we promised was like at the bottom, we talked about the need to structure hypotheses. We talked about the need to make prototype creative in order to test those hypotheses. But, folks on this call are managing big teams, running, they're like, I don't do things, I have people to do things, right? So how do you get the people doing the things that are represented here by this sort of opportunity? And I guess the message we want to share there is that's pretty easy, actually. We've shown how even the hardest bits of it you can do really in minutes with the right, approach. But in terms of the actual management of these programs, when you're doing it iteratively, from our experience, it's not even necessarily a full-time allocated role. We've seen these managed at really large scale by folks with fractional allocations. And basically the idea is that they're responsible for managing the stakeholders here. The stakeholders include you if you're the brand manager or the CMO, but they also include the creative teams who, of course, need to be part of this and need to be learning, and potentially they will take on the job of doing the prototype creative, or, that's sort of a dialogue between, the relevant folks. And they manage, of course, the testing team, the platform that's running the experiment. So, that's obviously us when we're doing it. So this is an example of a kind of a conceptual org chart of how that person in the, the coordinating role liaises with both the sort of people they're accountable to, as well as the collaborators that are executing both on the creative as well as on the test execution. So yeah, penultimate slide is basically, how do people get started with this kind of thing? Because it can feel daunting to say, well, look, that's a big vision. Doing stuff agile, constantly testing and learning, constantly, recreating roles, that maybe feels a bit hard. But the message I think that's really important is that really you can get started getting quite a significant return on this kind of thinking at a much smaller scale, and use that as a way to kind of prove the lift that you can get from it, the ROI from it, and build buy-in in the organization. So almost every time when we're doing work with teams, brand teams that are doing a lot of agile, at scale processes, they've always started here. They haven't just immediately started at 100 miles an hour. So, it's about just finding a few assumptions for an upcoming campaign that feel like they're important, that you might not be 100% certain about. Spoiler alert, there's really no way to be 100% certain unless you've done the testing. And then, basically running a round of tests. At that point, it's not a process. It's just, that first wave or second wave of the maturity scale. But, that's the starting point. Having done that, you're then in a great position to start exploring what it means to scale up the program. And people are typically very hungry at that point for the returns across all of the marketing that's being done. So takeaways before we go into Q&A. Basically, agile marketing delivers really large returns for upper funnel campaigns. That's why big brands are doing it, including firms that are focused, in terms of their own core business on advertising as their main thing they do. But others that, are baking muffins as well. You need the right data and processes to do it, though. It can't happen otherwise. And, new technology now makes that possible, whereas it really wasn't a few years ago. And finally, getting started is actually pretty easy. So we'll leave it there. I don't know, Taylor, as the MC of questions, if there's any, whatever seems the most interesting, or maybe you want to pick.
Well, thank you, James, for, the presentation. That was really great. Really, really great to see how thorough and detailed. And there's actually a lot of questions here. We've talked a lot about lift today. And there's a lot of questions about okay, what does that really mean, right? So how do we generate those lifts? And what, in practice, really, what does a 5 times lift versus a 2 times lift mean? So that's the first set of questions.
I
onto that one. Go ahead.
Just found the right tab so I can see them now as well. Thanks. So how are the lifts actually measured? Well, look, that's probably a good prompt actually to get straight into the Swayable platform and give you a quick peek at it. And in fact, I'll show it to you in a way that lets you look at it yourself, so that you can do it too. I guess that's sort of the theme here. So we'll start with just a totally blank window and give you a look at how it was measured. So if I go back to my Zoom and find the share button, and then I find the right tab. Okay, so this is just an ordinary vanilla Chrome window, and I'm just going to type in demo.swayable.com, and I'll put in iPhone because we looked at some of those iPhone messages, right? So the question was, how are the lift scores measured? And so this really shows you how. In this case, we've got 6 ads. This is actually further along for an iPhone campaign. And you can see 2 high scoring ads generating 6 or 7 points of lift, and 4 ads generating really half that. So, there's that 2x right there. So how was lift measured? Basically, every consumer that went through this, and you can see there's 8,500 consumers who were part of this experiment in 24 hours. So, for folks who've done consumer insights research before, you'll be familiar that that's not numbers, that's not statistical power or significance that folks are typically used to. Each of them was shown one of these ads or they were in a control group that did not see any of the ads. So all of them, though, were asked a whole bunch of questions. And, those questions included this question, this couple of questions here. I'll just go out of admin mode so you don't need to see all the little back end stuff. How would you describe your attitude towards the iPhone 14? How likely are you to recommend the iPhone 14 to somebody? In this case, we also had a purchase consideration question. How likely are you to consider purchasing the phone? Do you plan to buy it? So you can see there's a set of these metrics questions that are intelligently grouped together to give us a read on a score for each consumer that we call favorability, or in this case, consideration. So in every case, you've got a score for each consumer, but we've got thousands of these consumers, and 2,000 of them are in a control group. And when you ask those folks those questions, you get an average answer of about 63. And by the way, if you show them this ad down the bottom, your score is not that much more. You get an average score of about 66. So it goes up, but only goes up a little bit. The point is, it goes up a lot more with this top ad. When I click on the top one, you can see the group that sees that ad has a 70-point score. So because it's a randomized control trial study, that's the best evidence you can get that the creative caused that lift. It's proof of a causal relationship between your choice of the message or the ad here and the answers to this question, which is really the only way to get at somebody's future intent, is to ask them the question. So, once you ask them for across 3,000 people, your statistics on that are really good. And then there's a whole bunch of extra fancy kind of population modeling that adds on top of it. Feel free to ask follow-ups if you like. Taylar, you've been monitoring all the questions here, so let me know which one seems the most useful to talk about. Michael says, can this be used to test messaging in political campaigns? Yeah, I'm happy to say that's probably a significant reason for several outcomes, actually. Yeah, I mean, the campaign of the current US president used it certainly in the last election. Just as one example, the Senate runoffs in Georgia also used it. Swayable's being used across all frontline Democratic candidates for the current election as well. So that's definitely right. Also UK Labour.
Quick follow-up.
Yeah, go on.
All folks have about sort of the methodology is who are these 8,500 folks? Like, who sees these ads? Are they logging into Swayable to do that? Like, how do they serve these ads? Are they actually seeing these ads? How does that process work?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there are users of regular mobile apps. In other words, regular mobile phone users, anybody with a smartphone, which is basically everybody, has a series of apps that they've installed. And so Swayable has partnerships with a really large variety of apps, including various intermediaries that help us establish those partnerships. And basically their experience is that they're using that app and they run out of whatever credit you need to have to use the app, or they want some upgrade. Every app has something they want to sell you. Our partnerships let us offer that to the user, the consumer, in return for them taking a few minutes to participate in the research. So they opt into that and they have a very slick experience that's fun and short and easy. They get the thing that's for them a very high perceived value. But because there's just so many millions of people on these apps, we're able to get these enormous quantities very efficiently. And of course, then make sure that we're balancing the demographics extremely carefully against, the correct weighting of every demographic and even, other characteristics. Yeah.
Awesome. And then kind of a question, a lot of what we've been talking about is kind of a transformation of how we typically think about marketing and how we do it. Do you have any advice on the best way to advocate for this, within an organization?
Yeah, I love that question because I really think it's really the thing I think the most about. The ROI of doing this is just so ridiculously large. So, the obvious question is just like, people are doing it very quickly, but why isn't everybody doing it instantly? I guess always is the question in mind. And I think it's really, people have to see it, frankly, to believe it. And that idea of doing something modest at first to help build the buy-in across an organization, for us, has always been the most successful answer to that. So, finding some key question where there's a debate in the room about, just as one example with the fintech customer that we looked at earlier, there was a big debate about hiring a large celebrity for that campaign. And the celebrity was, expensive. It happens to be a celebrity that I think is really cool. Unfortunately, when we did the tests, it didn't really make that much difference. In fact, they found that using their own customers, authentic, real customers of that technology platform, was better in terms of generated more lift in demand for the services than the celebrity actor that, as we're maybe you're fans of, but unfortunately wasn't, worth the hundreds of thousands of dollars. So that was a nice moment where there was a live debate and people kind of were like, hey, I've got the answer to this. I can help inform this decision. And, that sort of created more champions for the adoption of the process more systematically.
Awesome. And then I think that this sometimes can be a little bit intimidating, a little bit. And it really kind of sometimes can seem like it is something that requires a very mature, organization or process to do. And so I was curious if you had any sort of thoughts about, how to do this if your organization is, maybe not as mature and you're kind of really just starting out.
Yeah, I think we've got lots of thoughts. I mean, I can share a slightly complicated slide, and feel free to screenshot it or whatever if you like. We've done a lot of work, as I mentioned, with various consultancies. Bain here in particular has a whole kind of what they call maturity framework. We've developed this with them. Cesar Breyer, who's one of the experts there, and I put this together. I think there's mature and there's mature in different areas. Some teams will have really quite a lot of depth of expertise on an insights team. For example, others might not. Some might have multiple brands and some centralized, capabilities, centers of excellence for either measurement or, marketing practices, and others don't. So, there's not really a one size fits all answer, but I think the first question is where is there depth, and where is there not? Where is there scale? So, there's enough brands that it's worth having this team that does this in the middle, or there's only one brand, so there isn't. With that, you can then begin to plot out what's the most important gap to start to fill. So yeah, not really one size fits all answer, but typically, given that it really doesn't take, the sort of whole idea here is to put the hard bits, the experiment design, just in a box so that any smart marketing person can use it rather than having to be responsible for designing an experiment. That's kind of the big idea. We like to do the analogy with a racing car. You can have all the complicated engineering in the world inside some fancy Ferrari, but you can still drive it by handing somebody the keys and they know how to turn the steering wheel. So the idea here is the testing and technology bit should be really easy to use. Taylar showed us even the creative parts can be mastered relatively straightforwardly. So I really do think anyone can do it. We've worked with brands at relatively early levels as well.
Awesome. And then there's another question here. What kind of gaps do you see between testing environment results and what actually happens in the real world? $1 million question there.
That's a great question. Yeah, there's a lot, of course, that happens in between a controlled environment and the real world. The media plan has to work, so you have to deliver the creative to the segments of consumers that you are targeting. Obviously, if you don't do that, it can't succeed. And the thing, of course, that you're on purpose leaving out of a controlled pretest is what are your competitors doing? What other noise is going on in the environment? So I think it's really important to kind of state the claim here the right way. The claim here is that this evidence is the best possible evidence of you making the right choice. It's not proof that when you finally run the campaign, you're going to get all that stuff right. Anything could go wrong. People could not pay attention to that channel that day. The competitor could do some launch and everyone's attention is drawn on that. So basically, it's control the things you can control and optimize the heck out of them, and recognize that you can't control everything. So basically, the short answer is it's very predictive, since typically, ads do something and better ads do more, and you can see that in market. So we're doing a lot of in-market tracking that proves that. Groupo Bimbo actually has run trackers in multiple markets and deliberately staggered the rollout of new campaigns in order to actually see that in-market lift. And by the time you're seeing in-market lift, at that point, that's the best proof that you can get, since those are not people anymore that are in a controlled experiment. They're folks in the wild that have had to receive those ads through the channels in the noisier, environment that they're in.
Awesome. I know we are running up on time, so I just wanted to say, sort of last call for any questions here, and then I think we have one more. And we'll be, pretty close to the end here, but wanted to thank everyone, of course, for being here with us today. And then this sort of last question is there anything that you think that teams can do to sort of better collaborate with creating the prototype creative, or any tips and tricks you have specifically about that prototype creative?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I think the biggest level we've seen is just kind of getting started quickly on it. And I think also for folks at a leadership level to themselves experiment with it. I think, we've been in situations where really smart people, um, it feels like there's a bit of a block there between like getting this started. How do I get it started? That doesn't maybe need to be there. And, often the best way of doing it is kind of model the behavior, kind of go, hey, in a sort of supportive way, I heard that this Canva tool is great, or, I heard that DALL-E can help us out, so I sort of throw this together. You could probably do better, and sort of by leading by example, I think, the wheels start turning and people then kind of want to, do better than what you've done. And maybe it's not your job ultimately to run it, but by sort of demonstrating it's possible, I think you can get quite far.
Yeah, I think that's great and really helps with that sort of collaborative feel between teams as well. And that sort of like almost mentorship there. So that's awesome. And yeah, but so thank you so much for doing this, James. It was so great to just hear your expertise. And thank you so much to everyone who's been here with us for the hour. I think it flew by for me. I hope it did for y'all. And we look forward to the next one. James, if there's anything that you want to wrap up with as well.
No, thanks, Taylar. Been a pleasure. And yeah, just really glad for all the collaboration on it.
Yes, me too. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.